All right. Well, welcome to the Fitishite podcast, and I'm your host, Blake, and I'm here with a special guest and someone who's very dear to me and my wife. And unfortunately, his wife couldn't be here, but Kolby Nance, and therapist and owner of Porter Sound here in Lakeland. But you are not in Lakeland right now, my friend. Where are you? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing now these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Blake. Thanks for having me on. And my family and I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee about a year ago, where we're, practicing up here and trying to get our feet under us and get settled in a new city. I still own Porter Sound there in Lakeland, and still have a number of active therapists that are practicing in the area, but we're also trying to build up here in Tennessee. And so it's good to be with you.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Kolby was my counselor when he was in town, and we even did some, I think, remote a little bit when you were moving. We were kind of still doing a little bit back then. And Maggie, his wife, is also, I think, co-owner with you and also a therapist. And she was counseling my wife, and just a huge blessing, really, really helpful. And so part of what I'm doing in this season is trying to help, this season of the podcast is trying to help kind of outsource things that are outside my scope of practice. So if someone comes to me and they're struggling with some eating disorders that are outside of my scope of practice, I would refer them to a therapist, and Kolby and Maggie are great people. So they're at the top of my list. But those kinds of things are, I'm kind of mentioning to the listeners as they kind of are tuning into why we're doing this, but let's get to know you a little bit. How did Porter Sound get started here in Lakeland, and what was kind of the philosophy around your counseling that you and Maggie set out to do?
Yeah, thanks. And just a little bit, I'll go back to the beginning, but a little bit of the story now is Maggie's, we didn't think that we would take on homeschooling. She's done that. So she's actually transitioned her responsibilities with Porter Sound. She still does some counseling within Porter Sound, but she's no longer half owner. One of our other therapists that has been with us for a while, she's taken over that ownership that Maggie used to have. So her and I are partners now. Her name's Jenica Timmy. She's there in town, which has been super helpful and a big blessing to have her still on the ground in Lakeland. It's just been better all around.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, Maggie, it's been great. Maggie and I did start Porter Sound 3 years ago. We're a little bit past 3 years now. We're currently in our 4th year. Yeah, wow. It's amazing how much time has gone by since then. But we started Porter Sound because we kind of had this whether unique approach or the specific way that our grad school had trained us, to where the counseling room could be a safe place for people to process any kind of season of life, and that we would come alongside of them for a season. And a lot of this is kind of captured in our name and good. Some of that our website describes, but essentially that we would, as a porter would, when somebody is going on a hike or really mountaineering, a porter is a local that'll come alongside you for a while and help carry the burden.
I love that.
And so we work with them. The name, that image kind of really captured us, and it's what we saw. Our role was just to assist, to kind of be a bit of a refuge, and to kind of bear witness to what was going on in someone's life, and to create a relationship where they could process things. And I think Lakeland was growing at the time. It still is growing exponentially. And so really quickly, as we started that, there were a few other counselors from our grad school that started to join us, and then at some points commute in. And so now we've got a team of about 8 counselors that are there. And they're working with a number of people. So yeah, a little bit about me. I grew up in Tennessee, so there's been a move back home for me. My wife grew up in Florida, which is kind of what put Lakeland on the map initially. Her parents were there. And we went to RTS in Orlando to get our master's of counseling, spent a little bit of time there. And, really it was kind of a heart for people and the story that God was writing in people's lives that kind of compelled us to go into this work in the way that God used certain people to change our stories. And so that's what kind of moved us down the counseling track. And here we are 7 years later after grad school.
Still going strong.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, that's
still
so cool.
Going strong. Yeah.
So
stronger on some days, weaker on others, but still going.
That's just life, I think.
That's right.
But I'm not a therapist, so but hey, so I heard you say a couple things, and one was, you kept saying that you alluding to the word a story, and one of the things that Lisa and I experienced a lot with you that, and I had gone to other counselors before, but I felt like this was a big part of our journey together was what we called story work. Could you describe what that is and kind of what the process of that is? And
yeah,
because I remember specifically, actually, right, nobody likes winding up in a counseling room typically. It's like going to rehab, like or physical therapy. Like that means you got an injury of some sort. You don't want to be there.
Yeah.
But I remember you trying to explain to me as we were diving in to like just some of my story, my upbringing, things like that. And I remember saying, I don't want to do that. And you winsomely kind of mentioning to me, you said, hey, all we're going to do is we're just trying to figure out where you were sinned against. We use kind of a Christian term there, wronged in your life. And then what kind of patterns that you chose to survive out of that with, and then we can discover those and see if we need to still do those or not. And I thought it was just a light bulb moment for me that was helpful. But maybe you could allude a little bit more for the audience of what that is, story work, and how you guys kind of use that.
Yeah, man, and compliments to you. It was just really well said. I think you said it better than I could, even there, kind of walking backwards. But I think you said a lot of that well. Yeah, story work kind of alludes to this narrative of life that things don't just happen in a vacuum or overnight. It's kind of this idea that we were formed over a lifetime, and the thing that has the greatest forming power is relationships. Typically, if you ask someone, they will go back to some cornerstone relationships, whether that was parents, friends, coach, mentor, someone that typically showed up at, it could have been a really painful moment of life, a time where there was high chaos, or it could have been a moment of significant delight. But whatever they kind of caught in that relationship, they, a little piece of their identity was probably shaped around it. Now that could be something you continue to go back to, of like, I'm trying to find life here. I remember what it was like to be the game to be on the line and I hit a home run. I remember what it was like to be chosen out of a group, or I could remember what it was like to be left out, and I'd spent a lifetime avoiding that. So it's this idea that there are these significant stories along our life that just kind of linger over time, and a lot of times we can develop certain relational patterns that become coping mechanisms, if you will. And relational patterns, I think what I mean by that is, just a little bit oversimplified, but we could be really, really concerned with what people think of us. So kind of always trying to maintain an image, or always trying to win approval from somebody, or that very thing could scare us. And so have a really hard time. We typically stay away. We can go up to a certain point in a relationship, but then we can't go further. And we might withdraw then, something along those lines. So I think the way you described it was great. normally, and this is all true about my life as well, and the role
Mm-hmm.
that therapy's played in my life, of life is kind of going along and then something ends up coming up, an event, or things didn't shake out the way that we expected them to, a disappointment, or whatever it might be. Maybe it's an habitual pattern that we can't seemingly break, and then there's a turn to help.
Mm.
Normally, it's very symptom focused to begin with when somebody enters therapy, but this idea of story or narrative of, I don't think this just came out of anywhere. It probably has a context. It probably has a background. And when you can sit with somebody who's kind, compassionate, curious, like wants to know you more than fix you,
Mm.
is a hope there,
Mm-hmm.
and can listen to the stories that you might not have been thinking about for years.
Mm.
But in kind of a process, that over a season, being able to connect why this symptom came up can be really, really helpful to somebody. It can be very orienting. Yeah, the idea of story work is that we've been shaped, over time, and often it can be very healing, redemptive, even to go back and visit some of those stories.
Yeah. No, that's so great. As I was just listening to you, as I was listening to you, I kind of was thinking through, why would somebody might be asking the question, why go back and revisit those stories? Some of them are terrifying. Some of them may be painful. Some of them might be joyful, but making that practice of maybe trying to kind of, I felt this before. Where are other places I felt this before? And getting curious about
Mm-hmm.
those things. Like what is the, for someone who maybe doubts that as a way that works in the human psyche to kind of release some of the habitual habits that are connected to those narratives. What have you seen as kind of like the thing that unlocks that for people? And maybe you can't answer that. I don't know, but I'd at least throw that one at you.
No, I'd be happy to. And some of it I might not be able to describe that well. Some of it could even be a bit of mystery, and just kind of, bearing witness to that it matters.
Mm-hmm.
One reason I think it matters to do it in the presence of another person, and I think that can be through a medium of telehealth over a screen. You can see each other's faces, but even more significantly in person, is that actually by telling a story, there is a little sense of reliving it. That it's not, and you see this in the work of trauma, that a lot of times people will tell stories as kind of data regurgitation. It'll be told very flat emotionally the first go around. But then when somebody kind of more holistically, emotionally revisits a story, and they do it in front of another person, to see another person's response, visually, to see them connect empathetically to the story, it's orienting. It gives us a sense of not just their insight into it, but actually the way that it triggered some other person's emotions, is a little piece of, what we may have needed when the story actually happened. And I think that that's really critical. Then, like, who you're choosing to tell the story to matters in that sense. And so, one other way that I do this, besides, this is something that I think that the arts as well captures. And so I'll go a little bit more into that, but not only telling the story in front of another person and being able to start connecting to the story emotionally from the client's standpoint, but also then seeing And this doesn't have to be a therapist, but this is kind of where they've spent their study and where they hopefully have their expertise and their heart engaged in the right place. So then seeing them empathetically respond to the story can be really, really powerful. But that could be a friend, that could be a trusted, safe person in your life. But another place where this happens is actually in the engagement of art. And what I mean by that is take a look at movies that tell a really good story, and just watch the sense of formation that takes place, and allow, like, just kind of it's just going to sound like you're probably in a therapist office right now, but just allow yourself to be present to what's going on. There's a couple of them that come to my mind in this idea of how does story shape someone over time. There was a recent movie that was released, I think, on Apple TV Plus called Coda.
Yeah, I heard. I didn't watch it.
Highly recommend it.
Really
I
good.
recommend it to anyone. It captures so well of how powerful relationships and story are in somebody's identity formation, and I just think it displays it beautifully. One that was from some years back, The Greatest Showman.
Oh, it's a great one.
It's a great movie. There's a bit of 5 to 7 minutes only at the beginning that you see him as a child, and then why he would become such a dreamer and ambitious man when he's older. And like, those are just a little bit of like what starts to capture, and then starting to see your life through that lens of story, I think really matters.
That's so cool.
I feel like I was long-winded on that one, Blake.
No. You had so much good stuff there. Sorry about that. That's me. So yeah, there's so much I want to say here, but counseling and coaching are not the same, but they have some similarities in that I love the name and how you described Porter Sound, and the idea that someone is not the star of the story, but they're someone who is a friend along the journey. So I always think of like Frodo Baggins is like the key person.
Yeah.
In Lord of the Rings, right? But like Bilbo is that right? Bilbo is his buddy who goes with him, is kind of like he's not the main star, but he's going up the mountain. And then there's one part where he can't go any further. Like, I look at coaching like that, right? The idea that like the really good coaches are really trying to help people become autonomous in their fitness and health.
Yeah.
And I love that you're doing that in counseling. I have seen counselors that have more of a lifelong philosophy that you need to be with me forever. And I've seen coaches do that too. And I'm not trying to put anyone down, but I want to ask you, like, more on the positive side, what would you say is kind of the reason why you like that and chose that name? And what is the benefit of someone who's saying, hey, I want to come alongside you for a season and get you autonomously, like, and Lisa and I are testimony to this, guys, that just this story work stuff really has been something that's cracked the nut for us in areas of our lives that we just couldn't talk about. And anyone who knows me, I'm a pretty open book for the most part in my life, but there were aspects of my story that I had these feelings and things that would go on in me that were destructive, and I didn't know where they came from or what they were. And so story work really helped me kind of track some of those and make some leeway. And I'd love to share a story at the end that's pretty vulnerable, but just a really great idea of what that looks like. But I said a lot there. I was long-winded on that.
Yeah. Well, same for me, Blake. I think I raised my hand to go to grad school and to become a counselor before I I'd probably done even 10-20% of the story work within my own heart that I needed to do. I think there is a relationship. There's a phrase that got used around grad school a lot of: you can't lead someone farther than you've gone yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person that's going to come into counseling, that their therapist has gone through the same thing they have. But I think what it does mean is that they've engaged their own suffering to the similar degree that they're asking their client to engage theirs. So, part of even what's captured in that name that you said you really liked is that this is a trail we've traveled down before, within our own hearts, within our own issues. And so there's nothing more off-putting than I think coming into an expert's office that feels distant and cold, in the sense of like estranging that, well, just try these few things, and I don't really know what it feels like to suffer, to go through what you're going through. Now, of course, therapy and counseling is the time is focused on the client. It's not about the therapist, but a sense of like, you feel like you're going through it with somebody that understands, somebody that has also engaged their own heart. Not that they're using that time for it, but that they are not a cold, disembodied guide. That so, I think several things are kind of captured in that image. That being one of them. That not asking a client to do something where you haven't gone before and done the work within your own heart as a therapist. Another thing in that is that it's not the therapist's process as much as it is the client's process. And so I liked your words, but this sense of, from a lot of standpoints of kind of keeping the onus and the precipice of healing on the client, and the therapist being available as walking alongside. There's I can't remember if I'm missing something in that, but those are the things that immediately come to mind.
That's great. I love it. I felt safer around you when you said that to me, that, this is kind of like our style and philosophy. And I want to share that for the listeners so that as they think about, choosing a counselor, if this is where they want to go for some of their help, that to me made me feel more safe, because it made me realize this person doesn't want me to latch onto them. They're here to actually help me. And so, and some of that comes out in my own story of feeling like people wanting me to latch onto them and meet them. So, so one of the things I would like to say just for listeners is kind of like, as we talk about story work, and I think that was a big thing I wanted to share, because it's a huge, I think, philosophy of what you guys do. I remember one story. Well, first off, one thing you said to me that was really, really good was, I said, man, it's such hard work to think. I felt so exhausted after our meetings, and I'm a fairly fit guy. I've done some pretty strenuous workouts, and I'm more tired after an hour of counseling than I am after an hour of working out. And I need to just me and my wife would just call each other after our sessions and just be like, I'm utterly exhausted. Oh, what did you guys go over? I just don't have the energy to talk about it. So it is normal to feel that kind of exhaustion, I would think, at least in me and my wife's experience.
Yeah.
But one of the things you said was, it's just not the work of thinking, but the work of feeling. And that really stood out to me, because I think I quoted Henry Ford, like, the hardest work there is thinking. And you said, well, I would say the hardest work there is thinking and then feeling what you're thinking. And I thought, oh yeah, that is really hard. Why that matters, and I can only say this from my own experience, was I can remember one, and this is a fairly vulnerable thing that I'm fine with sharing, but I remember that I went to an event and I had cracked a joke around a friend who didn't think it was funny, and something very simple. And I remember in that event feeling very anxious afterwards, and then leaving and going home and still feeling anxious and feeling like it overwhelms me to where I couldn't be present with my kids or my wife, and had to kind of go for a walk and think about everything. And I had been with you probably for about 8 months at that point. And when I got home, I could talk to my wife, and I realized that the same feeling of that anxiety and I had like a fear of abandonment in that conversation of just cracking a joke that didn't land well. And in that, I realized it was this exact same feeling that I had. I traced it all the way back to in first grade. And this might sound really weird to some of our listeners, but this was my story, and it was really helpful. And I remember in first grade feeling my mom and my first grade teacher talking in front of me about if I was smart enough to stay in first grade or have to be pulled out. And remember feeling the powerlessness of watching them talk in front of me and feeling like, what do I need to do? How do I need to perform to stay? And so, and then I just wept. I just started crying to my wife as I shared this, because I never cried in first grade over it, and I never appropriately felt it, like that fear, or could express it. And it made me realize that the joke, the not landing, my friend, had nothing to do with the reality of that. I had created habits of just having to perform in certain situations. And when I did not, this overwhelming fear of just not belonging and things like that. And how after that was released, I really, it's not that I never struggle with it, but I'm very familiar with it now. I know how to express it.
Yeah.
I know how to like see it, where it used to be just like, I would say it felt like somebody was hitting me in the dark and I didn't know where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to share here with our audience, is that you start to learn some of those skills that, and listen, I'm fine. If you have to go into like the manliness thing, like I'm a pretty fit guy. I bench 300 pounds. I'm not afraid to share some of that stuff, but like, this has nothing to do with that macho stuff. It's really about more of how people work. And so we have these stories that linger in us. And I feel like taking some time to reflect is huge. And that's why even at the end of my sessions with my clients, we go for a walk to just process the whole workout. What went well?
Yeah.
What did not go well? How are you feeling? What would you like to do better? And I just think that set time of reflection, and even doing a 4-minute story work walk after the workout is really beneficial. It's actually one of my clients' favorite parts of meeting with me.
That's awesome. I love it. Yeah.
So, I would just say all that to encourage that this stuff really has been a huge blessing to me and my wife. And that, just a practical example of that. But if you want to add anything to that, as we get ready to kind of conclude, I'd love to hear some of your wisdom.
Oh man. Well, that's just, a little bit speechless, I guess, at how well it was said, and deeply resonate, as you're sharing a bit of your story there, and can think through things in my life that, still, in so many ways, anxious over performing, or where that shows its head of popping up in unexpected places and things like that. But there were a few things that came to mind just quickly as you were talking about that. I don't know if I'm doing something that's out of bounds here. If you reference another podcast while on a podcast, I don't know if that's kosher or not. But
Totally fine.
One, I think you're doing a phenomenal job with this, Blake, and I'm like, man, I want to listen to some of the other episodes after we're done here. But
appreciate it.
A guy named, specifically more in my world of over this, counseling. A guy named Adam Young has done a lot of really good work and interviewed a lot of people that have contributed greatly to the work in this field. His podcast is called The Place We Find Ourselves. I recommend it often. But he defines empathy as the feeling, as feeling felt, like another person feeling. And even kind of as you went through a story and you were processing it with your wife, you begin to feel for this younger part of yourself. And so even as you revisit that story, you were feeling for that younger part of yourself. Immensely powerful. And that's kind of captured in that it's not just thinking, but it's feeling. It's actually recapturing some of the emotional experience in the story. that really matters. If I were to take 1 minute and like bridge the worlds a little bit of like, would love to just think that these memories or these stories are something that's just filed in a cognitive filing cabinet somewhere in our mind. But the immense research, without going way into it right now, that it's actually stored within our bodies and somatically, and that, you were talking about the experience of anxiety, that we actually physically feel that in so many different ways.
Oh yeah.
Those can often be the gateways into where some of these stories are stored. And so I think that there's this beautiful integration, that it's not just physical health and mental health, but this idea of wholeness, that the practice of physical care, bodily care, attending to the different ways that our bodies respond to certain things can be the avenues to so much of what we're talking about.
Wow.
And they have kind of this mutual sense of healing, I don't think you can access some of these stories, or sometimes you can't access the physical health because of some of these stories that have somewhat held your body captive to some different sorts of ways. And that's really not doing it justice.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I one of the things we do here when I work with clients is we go through kind of six key things to your health and fitness. And if you do these 6 things really well, you're going to see great results. But one of the 6 is stress management. And that's the one that everyone looks at me and kind of like, is like, what are you talking about? And it's so difficult in that one. It's the most difficult out of the 6, right? So if I'll list the other 5, right? So it's, you work out 3 days a week with some weights, you walk and you stay moving 8 to 10,000 steps a day, drink your water, get your sleep, and eat enough protein. And then if you do that, plus manage your stress, people will get really great results. When they're like, well, what do you mean by manage stress? And I'll try to use examples. I'm like, well, do you watch the news late at night? And they're like, yeah, but that doesn't stress me out. And what I need to get better at as a coach is trying to help explain how people, when they watch stressful things or talk about stressful things, that their body is actually feeling those things very similar to actually doing physical stress, and that your hormones can't actually tell the difference between the two. So your cortisol will release. Like I use the example of if you jump out of an airplane and you go parachute jumping, right? Your hands will sweat, you're moving. If you think about it for a long enough time, your body will start sweating and your heart will go up as if you're doing it. So there's an amazing thing about our brains that connect those two things. And so the imagination, that we have as humans is a very powerful thing, but it needs to be managed. And you're so right. Yeah.
That's well said. And even some of the ways that we carry, not just the stimuli in a present day sense, but past stimuli, that there's certain triggers that remind us of that. And it's not simply, maybe it wasn't just this moment, a joke not landing with a friend, as you said in your story there. But it's the stress carried from this previous period of life that just got ignited by this one thing. But now I'm feeling the weight of what was before, and all that, I would say, it brings on stress. I love the way you said that, like our hormones are, neurotransmitters. They can't tell the difference. They're firing just the same, and our bodies go into that same response. And so, gosh, well said, Blake. Thanks for sharing that story. I know that takes a lot of courage just to put something like that out there. And so,
well, I appreciate it. You and Maggie helped me figure out how to share my story. So I appreciate that. Well, real quick, if people wanted to find you or Porter Sound and they're local in Lakeland or in Chattanooga, what are some of the ways that we could link them towards you to get the help they need?
Absolutely. Probably most efficient way is our website, portersound.com. So there's 2 S's in the middle is what I always tell it, but it's Porter's Sound. But going to portersound.com, that'll have a phone number. It'll have just an inquiry page that can be filled out, but that's the best way to get in touch with us.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Please tell your wife, Lisa, and I said hello and appreciate her and her work. And hope you guys enjoy Tennessee. And I'll be jealous in a couple months when it's fall and it's still 90 degrees here. So,
well, man, Blake, I really mean it. Thanks for having me on, and it was just good fun. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Good catching up with you. And
Yeah.
I will have the website in the link. So people, if you're curious about finding that on the podcast, it'll be attached in the link. So thanks for joining us. Thanks, Kolby.
All right.